Tomyris has always been known as an archer commander with one of the strongest debuffs in the game, but is that still the case in 2024, especially with the release of Hermann Prime? In today's video, I will answer that question and also give you an in-depth guide on Tomyris, telling you her best skills, pairs, talents, equipment, and more, so you can get the most value out of this commander. So if you're interested in Tomyris or just her position right now with her poison debuff and where she stands in Rise of Kingdoms, you need to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off today's video by discussing Tomyris' skills, and unlike usual where I start at the active skill, I'm instead going to start at the 4th skill, because this skill is probably the most important skill. When it's at level 5, whenever this commander's troop launches a basic attack, it has a 100% chance to inflict a poison on the target for 5 seconds. The poison effect stacks up to 15 times, and its duration resets whenever they gain another stack. Each stack of poison increases the skill damage the target takes by 3%. This really means that Tomyris was the inventor of the poison debuff, which Hermann has on his active skill. It is important to note the same poison debuff of Tomyris will stack with Hermann Prime as well, and vice versa. So Hermann Prime's debuff will stack with Tomyris, and Tomyris will stack with Hermann. So it's definitely important to note that, and I think it's also important to note here that this is probably still the strongest debuff in the game between both Hermann and Tomyris, but Tomyris arguably has easier access to that poison debuff because she doesn't need to throw her active skill for it, whereas Hermann needs to throw his active skill for the poison, so there's definitely a little bit of a difference there. With Tomyris' active skill though, this is where she definitely starts to lose a lot more value compared to Hermann Prime, because the way it works is she deals a direct damage factor of 1000, and if the target is poisoned, which they almost will be, the skill will remove all stacks of poison and deal extra direct damage factor. The direct damage factor is equal to the number of poison stacks times 40. If the target has more than 10 stacks, it's the number of poison stacks times 80. So really simply, Tomyris will remove the poisonous stacks on your opponent, and she will translate those into extra damage for her active skill. If she has exactly 15 stacks, I think she gets like a total of like 2200 direct single target damage, which is honestly pretty decent. But the thing with this skill is you are dropping off your poison stacks, which once again, like I stated, are the most powerful thing that Tomyris has. So pretty much transferring what nowadays is more important than the damage factor for the damage factor increase. It's also important to note once again that Tomyris will remove poison stacks created by Hermann as well, which means Hermann's 4th skill is going to lose a lot of value if you are running a Tomyris that is stealing the poison stacks. That being said though, she can allow it to get more value, and I'll get into that when I get into the pairings. But yes, she will remove any poison stacks that Hermann Prime creates as well, because she's just going to remove any poison stacks that are on her current target. She's not going to remove them all, so because Hermann does an AoE that inflicts poison, Tomyris will not remove all those poison stacks, but she will remove whoever her current target is for the extra damage factor on her active skill. Tomyris' 2nd skill is really just a stat skill, and it's really rubbish most of the time nowadays. When attacking a city, she gains 30% attack and deals 10% less counterattack. I mean, this is probably a bad skill for most intents and purposes. You don't care too much about rallying cities, especially with Tomyris. She's not a very good rally anymore. She's certainly outdated in that regard. And the 30% attack is probably not worth losing 10% counterattack if you get swarmed down. So if you're going to get swarmed, this is pretty bad, and it's probably a reason that she's only a good rally in KvK2, because otherwise you could just swarm her. And also, like I said, she's a very old commander, so that means if you swarm her out, she's just probably going to fly down really quickly, so this skill is pretty much useless. The 3rd skill on Tomyris, and this is another actually pretty decent skill here, is that she gains another 30% attack, but more importantly, whenever she launches a basic attack, she has a 10% chance to reduce the target's defense by 30% for 3 seconds with a cooldown of 5 seconds. This debuff is actually extremely strong because it's a passive skill defense debuff. That means it will stack with any defense debuffs in the game, whether it be Hermann Prime's passive skill defense or Nevsky's normal active skill defense debuff, and even stuff like Zhang Yu's active skill defense debuff. It will all stack with those, so that's definitely a nice thing to have in Tomyris' kit, just to add a little bit of extra value on top of all of her debuffs. So you'll notice all of Tomyris' debuffs will hold value even till probably the end of the game, because she has no direct debuffs that can be stolen. There's no debuffs on her active skill, which means there is no commander that could technically copy her debuffs exactly, since she can just put her debuffs on top of that. So for example, if Hermann Prime puts 3 stacks of poison, Tomyris will just add an extra and make that 4 stacks. If Nevsky puts a defense debuff, Tomyris will just add her 30% increase, and that will make it like a 75% reduction total. So her debuffs are all stackable, which is definitely nice. The final skill to talk about is Tomyris' expertise, and this is another attack skill, just giving you more stats, and it's super simple. She gains 10% attack and deals 10% more counter attack, but whenever she is hit with a basic attack, the attacker's cavalry units can lose 10% attack until they stop attacking. So I mean, this is an okay expertise. You're nerfing the troops who are good against you, so basically she's going to do a little bit better against cavalry than some of the other archer commanders, especially at her age. So for example, I think Edward of Woodstock would probably trade worse against a Nevsky than an expertise Tomyris, because she is going to remove 10% of their attack just for being cavalry units. So overall, I mean, this expertise is nice, but really it doesn't have too much value. It's just a little bit more stats that you can gain once again. The final skill to talk about here with Tomyris is her relic, and honestly this is probably the strongest relic Lilith has released in a while for most of the Season 2 commanders. As you can see, Edward of Woodstocks and Alexander the Great, and even Saladin and Constantine, and even Genghis Khan, their relics all suck. But Tomyris actually has a really strong relic, especially considering she's a Season 2 commander. She's got 15% archer health, which is amazing on a commander like her, and she's also got 10% march speed. So unlike all the other commanders, really, when you look at their relics, they're just average. Tomyris' relic is actually very valuable. The march speed there is literally worth an immeasurable amount of value, just because of how strong march speed is, especially on archer commanders, and extra especially on a commander like Tomyris, who has no march speed in her kit. The archer health is also extremely valuable because some of her best pairings, which I'll talk about later, don't have any health in there, which means Tomyris is going to benefit a lot from having the health in her kit. It's also important to note that she has no health in her kit in general, so it's definitely nice to have extra health in a commander that has no health within their skills. So Tomyris' relic is actually very strong, and if they ever add a double relic for it, it's going to be even stronger and maybe one of the best relics in the game. I would say it's almost at the same level of like Mehmed, with how strong the relic can be. Of course, Mehmed's relic was slightly better to begin with, or maybe I'd say it's actually on par. So if Tomyris receives a double relic, her relic would be at the same power of Mehmed, in my opinion. So now with the skill overview out of the way, what can I say about Tomyris' kit? What skill level would I recommend for her? And I think the real simple one here is a 5-1-1-5 build. That means maxing her first skill, skipping the 2 middle skills, and maxing her 4th skill. Because really nowadays, Tomyris is only going to be used in Immutable for a debuff, and if you're a free-to-play low spender doing that, which I don't recommend, you're just only there for the debuff. That means the 2nd skill and the 3rd skill don't really help you. Yes, the defense reduction is nice, but it's not going to change much. The attack increase here, yes, it's nice, but it's not going to change much. And then her expertise is nice once again, but it's not going to change much. And really, the 2nd skill is completely useless. So you'll notice Tomyris really is a 5-1-1-5 commander, and you don't really need to go any further than that for the rest of the game. That being said, as we look over her skills, I think you can say her stats are really outdated. I mean, she's got no defense in here. She's got no march speed until her relic. She's got no health until you get her relic. She's got no forms of attack reduction, skill damage reduction. She can't deal with smite damage at all. She's really just the most squishy archer commander I think we own. Even YSG could arguably be more tanky, because he can just deal crazy damage, which in turn can increase your tankiness, because a good offense also means there's a good defense. So Tomyris definitely is probably one of, if not the squishiest archer commanders in the game, missing a ton of just stats in her kit, and the only thing she's really got going for her are the poison debuffs and her active skill, still dealing some okay damage factor. Now, as for Tomyris' talent build, I mean, really she's a difficult commander to build talents for. You don't really want to run her as a primary, since her talent trees kinda suck. I really just went all in on the archer tree since it's reliable and you know it's going to improve her trades. And then I went down and I got Buckler's shield because she really does want to take less damage. She's not a very tanky commander and the counterattack here is nice. and then I just went into the attack tree and put the rest of the points where I could really put them. I didn't really focus on rage gain with Tomyris because if you are running her as a primary, I'm guessing you're trying to minimize her rage gain, even though then you would still want to put her as a secondary because her active skill, as you saw, increases depending on how many poison stacks there are, which means the slower you deal her active skill, the more damage you're going to deal. But as you can see here, I kind of went into the attack tree up until attack for all troops here, and also up until defense for all troops on the other side. I did pick up obviously unyielding and armor joints because they are reducing the amount of damage that you are taking and increasing the amount of counterattack that you are dealing. So if you're running Tomyris as a primary commander, which when we get into her pairs, she's pretty much never going to be a primary, this is the build I would really recommend if you want to run her like that. Now, as for the best pairs for Tomyris, when we look at Season 2 pairs, she's really only got one overpowered pair, and that is with Edward of Woodstock, leaving Edward as the primary, because Edward of Woodstock is a really tanky, fairly fast commander. Well, not really tanky, but fairly fast archer commander who's got very decent single target damage and an extremely slow rage cycle. Tomyris is able to really benefit if she is a secondary in that march, often able to really build up to her 15 poison stacks to throw her active skill off, and if it's not 15, it's around 12 to 13 because of Edward of Woodstock's slow rage cycle. That being said, Edward does have a few weird talents almost when you are running him with Tomyris, and you're probably not going to go down and get stuff like Rejuvenate. If you're running your Edward of Woodstock as the primary, you would probably rather go into Whistling Arrows and get all the stats besides stuff that increase your rage gain. So you would go anywhere besides down to Rejuvenate. You would go all the way up to Clarity instead of getting Rejuvenate just because of how much it can affect Tomyris' effectiveness, especially in Season 2, which is where we're talking about this. Also in Season 2, I mean, because Tomyris is a fairly overpowered commander just because of her how new she is in that season, you could really run her with any of the archer commanders, Tomyris, El Cid, YSG, even some of the epic commanders, she's still going to be pretty good. I see a lot of people run Tomyris with YSG, especially if they already have her expertise and they're migrating back, or if they plan to expertise her and they're going to Season of Conquest. So you'll notice Tomyris with YSG, even though there's a bit of D-synergy there because of YSG's rage gain bonus, especially in Season 2, it's kind of bad to have that, but you can still get away with it. So Tomyris with YSG is also another viable option, and the same thing with a Thutmose, and the same thing with an El Cid. As for Season of Conquest pairings, I mean, number one is Hermann Prime, because even though there is a little bit of D-synergy between them with Hermann wanting to keep poison stacks and deal as many poison stacks as possible, Tomyris is able to boost him by dealing as many poison stacks as possible. Because Hermann Prime's normal ways of dealing poison stacks are a small chance on his 4th skill and through his active skill, dealing more consistent amounts of poison will help you trigger Hermann's expertise more often, and also allow you to benefit from the Mandrake Root skill a little bit more, because if you're able to get consistent amounts of poison on your opponents, you're able to pretty much increase the damage reduction you receive. Something I would also let you know though is this is probably the worst pairing for Tomyris in a longer battle, because Hermann really benefits from having poisons on the target for a long period of time if you're doing one of those long battles. So that means if you're doing a 1v1 that's going to last the full time until death, Hermann Prime with Tomyris is really bad, because Tomyris is pretty much removing Hermann Prime's ramp up, which is what makes him really strong in a 1v1 battle. So you'd rather run a Hermann with someone like a Boudica or a Zhu Lang before you'd run a Hermann with a Tomyris in a 1v1 situation. On the open field though, Tomyris can be pretty valuable with Hermann and reduce the amount of all damage you take by up to 8, 9, 10%, which is a fairly large number that's going to make a pretty big difference. Also, I'd like to mention that Hermann Prime's extra poison stacks, if you do run him as the primary commander, will usually almost guarantee that you reach the 15 you need for Tomyris' active skill, and will allow you to deal crazy amounts of damage into your opponent, which is always a nice thing to have. So I think Hermann with Tomyris is probably Tomyris' best pairing, and it's a pairing that a lot of people run if you're doing 4 or more archer marches. Other than that, there are a few other pairings for Tomyris, and these ones are a little bit more niche or outdated. Artemisia, because she self-silences, allows you to deal extra poison stacks, and I've seen 1 or 2 people still run it nowadays, but it is fairly outdated. Another one is Gilgamesh, who is just, if you run him with Tomyris, there for the debuffs really, you're just making that march purely for debuffs. You got a little bit of tankiness out of Gilgamesh, and with Tomyris' new March speed from the Relic, it kind of allows that pair to work a little bit better. So Gilgamesh Tomyris is pretty good. Funny enough, in the Gilgamesh Tomyris, you just want to get your Gilgamesh active skill off as soon as possible, so building into the skill tree for Gilgamesh is still good, and you'd probably go with something similar to this if you're running the Gilgamesh, just without Naked Rage, because you're not going to be running him with YSG like I did. So really, Gilgamesh with Tomyris is actually a pretty good debuffing March, but it's definitely going to be very squishy, and if someone hits it, it is going to die pretty quickly, just because Gilgamesh is a little bit low on stats compared to some of the more modern archers, and he's dealing fairly low direct damage factor. Moving on to some more stronger pairs that still aren't completely meta, Nebuchadnezzar with Tomyris is not the worst, because even nowadays you're more focused on the rage cycle. Since Tomyris' debuff, while it is good, you don't really care too much about building the extra poison for our active skill, since it's just not a concern at that point. You would just rather get as many poison stacks as you can, while also dealing as much damage factor as you can, because the damage on Nebu is just more important than the damage on Tomyris, which is why Nebu's fast rage cycle is better. The same thing with Boudica. I mean, you're not going to get Tomyris' damage to be better than a fast rage cycle Boudica, so Boudica Prime with Tomyris, same situation. You just want to build up your rage cycle as quick as possible and throw it off very soon just to deal really high damage. So really, I would say Tomyris' best pair is probably Hermann, and it's probably her only really good pair, but you can run her with pretty much any debuff heavy commander like Gilgamesh or Nebuchadnezzar and Boudica as some of her other main pairings. Now, as for the accessories and equipment that you use on Tomyris, I mean, it's usually fairly similar to other commanders, the only difference being whether or not you want to use her as a fast rage cycle commander. If you are trying to get a fast rage cycle out of her, then I mean, pretty self-explanatory, you go with Horn of Fury. If you don't really care about her rage, you're trying to make her rage as slow as possible, which is a goal of some people, then you will go with accessories that just don't boost your rage. So stuff like Ring of Doom, or even some debuff accessories like Concealed Dagger and Mora's Web are going to be the best choice in that situation, because they're going to boost your debuffs in that situation, or boost your damage if you're using Ring of Doom, and they're not going to give you rage like the Horn of Fury does or the Kurak War Drums do. So pretty much, unless you want to deliberately give your Tomyris rage, I wouldn't go out of my way to get Horn of Fury or get the Kurak's Drums, because they both are going to give your troop a bunch of rage that's going to ruin that rage cycle that allows her to deal more damage, especially in Season 2, where I think you can actually get the Kurak's War Drums in that season. So make sure you're not running them on your Tomyris of all your marches. Now, the final thing I would like to talk about is whether or not Tomyris is actually a good commander in Rise of Kingdoms anymore, at least. And I think the answer really is just a no for almost all players. Unless you're running a super niche 4-March Archer Murder Ball, she is not a good commander for you to run. Her debuffs, while they are good, you can get them on Hermann Prime, and her stats honestly just suck. I think that's really easy to say. Even with her relic being as strong as it is, it's just not enough to bring her up to that meta level, and she's really just going to be outshadowed by Hermann Prime till the end of time. That actually rhymes pretty well. So really, overall, Tomyris is not the best commander in the current meta, and even when I last made my video like a year ago, she was even then not the best commander. The only people who really used her were whales, and that's now even the case, but it's even rarer to see a Tomyris just because of how niche she is, and the only time you'll ever see it is in a 4-March Murder Ball, where you're pretty much forced to run Hermann Tomyris. Otherwise, your marches become super weird with stuff like Henry and Ramses and things like that, which just are not the best commanders to be using. So Tomyris with Hermann is the only time you're ever really going to see that march, and it's really only there for the really niche, super hardcore Archer main players who are probably and definitely whales, spending a lot of money on the game. So now that we've made it to the end of today's video, I just want to let you guys know I'll be doing a bunch of live streams over the upcoming days of my Zone 4 battle against 1568, and I forget the other kingdom, hopefully I don't offend anyone with that, 1568 and also 2098. So if you guys want to see these massive Zone 4 battles where 2 fairly huge A-seed kingdoms, sorry, 4 fairly huge A-seed kingdoms are going to be going head to head to fight over this zone, you definitely want to come down to my live stream. I'm going to stream every minute of it, and there will pretty much be no delays. So if you're interested in the stream and you want to watch me fight in KVK, trust me, come on down. I'll have the times linked in the description. I think from memory, it is around 24 hours or 25 hours after I upload this video. So if you're interested in coming down to my live streams to watch me fight in KVK and watch and see if we win, I highly recommend it. It'll be a very fun time. I'll be using commanders that you've probably maybe not seen in a while. Commanders like even Boudica and Cyrus, probably sometimes in that zone, or even some Assure Money Pal and Hermann Prime content. So if you want to see those commanders active and real on the open field from a free-to-play low spender perspective, mainly low spender, then definitely come on down to the stream. I highly recommend it, and it's always fun when people tune in and ask me questions. Now I just want to thank you guys all for watching, and I hope to see you on the live streams and also the next video.